Hello, Jonesy here. In this tutorial, I will show you how to easily create responsive tabs using React. You will need to create two small components, and that is it. This right here is what the finished tab menu will look like. If you want code that you can copy and paste, there's a corresponding blog tutorial, which you're seeing right here. I'll leave it in the description of the video. It follows very closely with this video tutorial. I will not cover detailed project setup in this video, but I'm just starting from a basic React app that was just created using npm init React app tabs. Also, I'm using Visual Studio Code. To start off, you're going to use a little bit of Bootstrap. So, go to your terminal and install that with npm install Bootstrap. Now that that is installed, go to source index.js and we need to go to the blog tutorial. So, go here and copy this import. I have not memorized it yet, so now just paste it in right here. Cool. Now you have the CSS part of Bootstrap. Next, let's get right into building these tabs. Create a folder inside of source called components. Then, inside of it, create a file called tabnav.js. So, tabnav is a React component. So, with React components, the first thing you always need to do is import React from React. And I always create class components, so I'm going to create a class component. Of course, it's called tabnav extends react.component. And the first thing I always like to do is create the render method, because it doesn't always need a constructor, so I don't start off with a constructor. I create an empty render method, which always has a return inside of it. And then this is where components or HTML elements will go. I always forget this part, so just so I don't forget, I'm going to go ahead and export default tabnav. Otherwise, I would forget it. Okay, so next, inside of return, we'll do div. You always have to have one div as the parent. And on this, I'm going to give it a style of probably a width, maybe let's say 30%. And the reason I'm doing this is so that our tab nav won't be too big. I don't want it to take up the entire screen. I just want it to take up a little part of the screen. So inside of this, let's put an unordered list. And this is where a little bit of Bootstrap's going to come in. Going to give it some styles of nav and nav tabs. Those are Bootstrap. It just makes it so your tabs look nice and you don't have to create the styles yourself. Which you can create the styles yourself, but this just makes it a lot easier. And then, before we do the inside of the unordered list, on the outside, let's do this.props.children. If you are not familiar with React, this.props.children may be a little confusing. This just means whenever we use the tabnav component, anything that we nest inside of it will render there, right beside the unordered list. And this may not make sense at the moment, but it'll make sense later. Actually, just to give you a better idea of what this is, go to the blog tutorial and you see right here, this is what it looks like when you use your tabnav component. Well, that hello world is nested inside of it. Well, if we go back to the code, hello world would show up right here. inside the div, but right after the unordered list. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so we have the unordered list. Now it's going to have a list of tabs. So to do that, you're going to need to do this, because there's multiple ways to loop through a list of things in JavaScript, but this is the main way that I've learned how to do it, and it works really well. So this props tabs map. Okay, so I'm gonna stop here. This isn't it. This isn't everything, but so you see I'm using props here. This component is gonna have a few different props, and I think that I should explain that first. So I'm gonna go back to the blog tutorial. So it's gonna have three props. First one called tabs. It's just an array of strings defining the names of the tabs. So if you don't know what a prop is, this is a prop. It's on your component, and as you see, it just equals an array of strings, and it defines the tabs that you want, or the names of the tabs. The second is a prop called selected. It's a string that is equal to one of these tabs defined here. It is the currently selected tab. And then the third prop is called setSelected. It is an actual method that is passed in to our tabNav component to actually set our selected prop. Okay, now that hopefully makes sense, I'm going to go back to the code and write this. So we're looping through our tabs, we're looping through that array of strings, and for each tab is what this is saying. What we want to do, first of all, is create a variable called const active equals. So if our tab is equal to the selected tab, then we're going to want to use a style of active. Otherwise, just use an empty string. Again, I think this will make more sense as we continue on. So that's just a variable. It either equals this string or it equals this string. So this style or no style. Okay, so next, inside of the map, which loops through an array, you always have a return. So put the return here, and what you return here is what is rendered. So we're gonna put HTML here, and it gets rendered for every tab. So we have 3 tabs, or we're gonna have 3 tabs, and it's gonna render this 3 times. So it's going to be a list element. On this list element, let's give it a style of nav item, which is just another Bootstrap thing. Something you have to do for the map function is you have to give a key. So pretty much it's required by this that you have a key. You'll get an error if you don't put it, which it's just a thing that's required. So it also has to be unique, which each tab is going to be unique. Like the name of it is going to be unique, so you can just pass in the tab to it. Then next, let's have an anchor tag, and let's give it a style as well. Except instead of using double quotes, let's do this, because we're going to have some dynamic styling in here. First of all, let's give it the Bootstrap styling, which it needs a nav link. Put a space. Now, let's put our active style. So that's our variable here. It's either this string or this string. And it just goes in here. And it's dynamic because we're using this variable to choose one or the other. So pretty much if it's selected, then you're going to get an active tab. Otherwise, you don't get an active tab, and that's all that's doing, pretty much. We need one more attribute on this anchor element. So let's put the onClick and do an arrow function like so, and do this dot props dot set selected, and pass in the tab that is going to be the current tab, because if you click on it, you're setting it to the currently selected tab, and that's what this method does. Okay, now inside of this anchor tab, or anchor tag, we put the tab. And all this does is it's just putting the name of that tab right here inside the anchor tag. And I believe that is it for this component. Okay, so next, go over here and create a new file, call it tab.js. So this will be a component that will be nested inside of your tab nav component to define each tab that you want to create. So you just create this exactly the same way as the previous one, like so. And of course, you want to give it a render method as well. That's always the first thing I do. And inside of this, what I'm gonna do, it's gonna be a little bit different. What we're gonna do is make this conditional. So, pretty much, this component is going to take in one prop, or maybe more than one, but definitely one prop, and the prop is going to be called isSelected. You can kind of think of the tab component as like the tab content, what shows up in that tab. And if this tab is selected, then you show that content. If it's not selected, do not show the content. So that I'll code that up and it'll make a lot of sense. So if this dot props dot is selected, and then wrap your return here, and inside of return, simple enough, just put a div, and then this dot props dot children, which we learned from earlier, just passes down whatever you nest inside of this component when you use it. And that's pretty much it. It allows you to pass in whatever you want into here. And two other things. So if it's selected, it returns this, but if it's not selected, you need to return null, which will just return nothing. And then don't forget the thing I always forget, which is to export default tab. Okay, cool. Now that we've done that, let's go to app.js to set things up to see all of our changes. First thing I would do is just get rid of everything inside the parent div. You can get rid of this if you don't want it. And I think I'm going to start off with a constructor. So yeah, I think that's the best idea. Oh wait, before I do that, instead of doing a functional component, I'm going to make this a class component. Easy to do, just take that out. Extends React.component. Now you have a class component, but you can't just have a return like this, so you need to make this into a render method. And most people would disagree with me when it comes to using this many class components, but I just like them, and it's what I started out with, it's what I know how to do. So, I'm using a class component. And let's use a constructor. Constructors in React always take in props, and then those props always need to do this. Like, you need to pass them into super. That's just like a React thing. Okay, inside of the constructor, we're gonna do this dot state equals an object, and inside that object, we're gonna name a value called selected. By default, let's just call it home. That's just what I'm calling it. You can call it whatever. And then we're going to create a method called set selected, and it takes in a tab as a parameter. And all we're going to do is this dot set state, and we're going to set that selected value to whatever you pass in as the tab here. So at the moment you might not understand what these are for, but as I go, I will explain it a little bit better. So first thing is first, I think I'm going to define some CSS inside of app.css. Just, this isn't required, it's just something I want to do to make things a little bit easier. I don't remember exactly. Pretty much I want to center the tab menu. That's pretty much all I want to do. So in order to do that, I think I can do display of flex direction of row, and then a justify content of center, and I think that'll do the job. And then one other style thing I want to do is just give a margin top before. This is Bootstrap, it just gives you a little bit of margin. I could have done it in app.css, but I did it this way. And this is just gonna make the tab menu not be at the very top of the screen. Now that we've done that, we can use our actual tab menu, or tab nav. So tab nav, and for me, it's going to auto import this when I press enter. So you see up here, it was imported automatically. If yours doesn't do that, make sure you import it. So the tab nav, as I said earlier in the video, it's going to take 3 props. The first one is going to be called tabs, and what this takes in is an array of strings defining the tabs you want. So I'm going to have home, settings, I guess, and profile. So that's that prop. The next prop is called selected, and this is going to take in this dot state dot selected. Easy as that. And then the last prop is called set selected, and it's going to take in this dot set selected, and that just passes in your method here so that the tab nav can use that method inside of it. And there is a very specific reason I'm doing it that way. Okay. So actually I'll explain why we're passing in the method and why we're passing in state like this. I'll go ahead and explain that. So anywhere you use this tab navigator, it's going to be in like a page, or it's going to be in some component, and the component is inside of will be called a smart component. What that means is it just handles logic. So if you're using state and you're setting state, you're handling logic. In a real world application, this would probably be like pulling some data from a backend database, and that is considered a smart component because it's pulling data, it's messing around with data. So anywhere you use this, it's a smart component and it deals with logic. Whereas the tab navigator itself, and also the tab component, they are called dummy components. They're called that because all they do is display information. Like if you see here, there's no logic really. I mean, I guess you could say this is logic, but like all it's really doing is displaying HTML elements, and that's it. And same thing for the tab navigator, just displaying HTML. and it does have to like loop through each tab in order to display it, but that's the main thing it's doing, is displaying data. And that's why it's called a dummy component. And that's why we're storing our state in this component in our method, and then we're passing our method and the state in to the dummy components. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, feel free to leave me comments. So next up, what we're gonna do is create the tabs that we want. So just create a tab. I want 3 tabs, so I'm just gonna go ahead and copy that, paste this 2 more times. That's 3 tabs. As I said earlier, each tab is going to have a is selected prop, and what this will be, it's a boolean value, so true or false, and it'll be this dot state dot selected equals home. So each tab will correspond with one of these. So if the selected tab is home, then it will tell it to render whatever we put in here. And we'll do the same thing. You can just copy this. Do the same thing with this tab, except we're going to use settings. And then the same thing here, except we'll use, there we go. We'll use profile. Now, let's just put something inside of each of these. So you can put any HTML you want. So some test text. And then, so that's a paragraph tag with some text in it. Let's put h1 tag and just say more test text. Boop. And then just to show that we can do it, let's put an unordered list in here with some list elements, list test 1. And just to be a little bit quicker, I'm just gonna paste these down here, make this 2, make this 3, and yeah, cool. Okay, so generally I recommend saving and checking your browser for like if there's any errors or what you have currently created. I don't usually recommend writing this much code without like checking for errors, but for the sake of tutorial, that's what I'm doing. But now we can go ahead and save everything and go ahead and npm start to run your local server. And as you see, we are already getting an error. You may not be getting this error, but I definitely am. I think it's because it did not automatically import the tab component for me. So to fix that, simply, I'm just going to copy and paste this and take out nav for both of these, and now it is imported. Simple enough. And there is our tab component. And let's make sure that it is responsive. So if we click here, it goes to that. If we click here, it shows the unordered list. Awesome. That is pretty much it. There is a lot more you can do here, but this is kind of like the basic layout. One thing that really bugs me is you see the cursor is not a pointer. Like it should be a little hand, but it's not, and that's an easy fix. Another thing that bothers me is there should be some padding here to make this go down a little bit and over to the right a little bit. But that is a super easy fix. And it's just kind of, that's like one of those CSS things you just kind of mess around with until you get it how you want it. So I will not be showing that in this tutorial, but I hope I was able to help you out today. If so, feel free to like and subscribe. And if you have any questions, please comment below and I will see what I can do. YOUTUBE out.